Okay, so today we're diving into some, well, pretty intense stuff, but super fascinating too. We're talking EMP attacks, and I know it sounds like something you'd see in a movie, right?
Right.
But this YouTube video we're looking at, Facts Matter with Roman Volmakov, it really lays out like a really convincing argument for why this is a threat we got to take seriously. I mean, it's kind of scary.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's definitely been kind of like, on everyone's mind more and more lately. You see it in the news all the time. And let's
Yeah.
be real, it's kind of hard not to feel a little anxious about, a possibility.
Totally. And while the video definitely leans into that whole like, doomsday vibe, which,
Yeah.
it does make you think, but it also brings up these really important questions about like just how much we depend on technology these days and how vulnerable that makes us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get into like, all the potential chaos and the scary stuff, let's just take a step back for a second. What exactly is an EMP attack? Like paint me a picture. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so picture this. A nuclear weapon detonated way up high, above the Earth. And here's where it gets different from, the usual image we have of nuclear war. Instead of this huge fiery explosion on the ground, we're talking about a blast that basically sends this massive electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, up into the atmosphere. And this pulse, you can't even see it, but it spreads out crazy fast at the speed of light and basically messes with anything that uses electricity.
Whoa, okay, so less mushroom cloud, more like an invisible shockwave that fries circuits instead of buildings.
Exactly. And the really freaky thing is, even a pretty small nuke, if it's detonated at the right height, can create an EMP that reaches way farther than a normal explosion on the ground.
So we're not just talking about like a city getting wiped out. It could be like entire regions, even continents, suddenly in the dark.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. Think about everything that depends on electricity. Communication, transportation, hospitals, everything. Food storage, it'll all be gone just like that. And as bad as that sounds, the long-term effects could be even worse.
It's wild. The video talks about like some actual EMP tests back in the day that really show how bad this could be. They mentioned Project Fitzbowl and the Starfish Prime test back in the 60s. Didn't those like accidentally cause some problems?
Yeah, they did. And those tests are a huge warning about just how unpredictable EMPs can be. Like with Starfish Prime, the US set off a nuke way up in the atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean. They figured they were far enough away from, people and stuff that there wouldn't be any problems. But they didn't realize just how far that electromagnetic pulse could travel.
Wait, so they actually caused damage from that far away. What happened?
Well, hundreds of miles away in Hawaii, streetlights went out, alarms were going off, and even like a whole telecommunications system got messed up. It was a real wake-up call.
Yeah.
It showed that an EMP could cause problems way beyond the initial blast zone.
Wow. And that was just a test. This video claims that Russia, China, North Korea, they've all like made some pretty disturbing comments about their EMP capabilities. Like there's this one part where they quote a Russian official who brags about having 10,000 nuclear weapons ready to go. That's not exactly something you want to hear.
That's totally not. And it shows how like a country that might not be able to match the U.S. in a traditional war, with tanks and planes and stuff, could use an EMP to even the playing field. They could cause a lot of damage without having to, like, start a full-blown nuclear war.
It's like the ultimate equalizer, but in a terrifying way. And then there's the societal impact. The video talks about this report from the EMP Commission back in 2001 that says up to 90% of the U.S. population could die after a big EMP attack. That's a crazy number. How did they even come up with that?
Well, that number isn't about, like, people dying in the blast itself. It's about what would happen after, with everything shut down. Imagine. No communication, no transportation, hospitals in the dark, the entire system that gets food and medicine to people, it would all collapse.
Yeah, it wouldn't take long for things to, descend into chaos. We're talking total societal breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. And while it's impossible to say exactly what would happen, the potential for like widespread suffering and just complete societal collapse, it's very real.
It's like one thing breaks, then another, and then another until like the whole system just falls apart. It really makes you realize how fragile everything is, how much we depend on electricity for like literally everything.
And it's not just about, like, the physical stuff either. Think about what it would do to people's minds, Suddenly there's no way to communicate, everyone's isolated, nobody knows what's going on.
Right.
That would be, like, incredibly disorienting, even traumatic.
It would be like going back to the dark ages. Overnight, all the things we take for granted, gone. And then, people start to panic. Who knows what could happen?
Exactly. And that's something people don't always think about when they talk about EMPs. They focus on the immediate damage. But the social and psychological effects, those could be just as bad, if not worse, in the long run.
So, so what do we do? I mean, is it hopeless? Should we all become doomsday preppers and go live in bunkers?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. Being prepared is always smart, but I think the real solutions are bigger than that. We need to work together as a society, and we need to, fundamentally change the way we think about these things.
Okay, I'm listening. Collective action and a shift in thinking. What does that look like, practically speaking, when we're talking about EMPs?
Well, for one thing, we got to make our infrastructure tougher, more resilient. That means investing in technology and systems that can withstand an electromagnetic pulse.
So, making our power grids, our communication networks, all that stuff harder to knock out.
Exactly. It's not about making them invincible, but about making them more robust, so that one little thing going wrong doesn't bring the whole system down.
Makes sense.
Huh.
But that sounds really expensive and complicated. How do you even begin to do that? And are there, maybe simpler things we could do as well?
Oh, absolutely. One thing that's often overlooked is the importance of redundancy and diversification.
Redundancy and diversification. Sorry, could you explain those?
Sure. So right now, a lot of our critical systems are very centralized. They rely on a few really important points, which makes them vulnerable. If we could create more redundancy, basically, more backups, and diversify our energy sources, for example, then we're not so reliant on any one system.
So spreading things out, having multiple options. So if one thing goes down, it doesn't take everything else with it.
Exactly. It's about building in layers of resilience so the system can keep working even if part of it fails.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it seems like that would have benefits beyond just, preparing for an EMP.
Right.
Like a more resilient infrastructure, more diverse energy sources. Those are good things to have no matter what, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's really important to remember. This isn't just about some, far off worst case scenario. It's about building a better, stronger society overall. It's about realizing that depending on technology, which we all do, comes with a responsibility to, make sure that technology is as safe and resilient as possible.
You're right. It's about being aware of the risks and actually doing something to reduce them, both individually and as a society. It sounds like there are things we can do, like real steps we can take to make an EMP attack less devastating. But, still a scary thing to think about.
It is. But I don't think we should let fear control us. Remember, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand the risks, the better we can prepare for them and hopefully prevent them from happening in the first place.
Right. Informed awareness, not just freaking out.
Yeah.
So instead of panicking, maybe the takeaway is that we need to be talking about this more, as a society. We need to talk about our priorities, what matters most, and what we can do to protect those things.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe facing a threat like this, as scary as it is, could actually be the thing that pushes us to create a better future, a future that's more resilient, more sustainable, and hopefully, a little less scary.
So we've talked about, the worst case scenario, the what ifs. But this video, even though it can be pretty terrifying, it also hints at the possibility of rebuilding after an EMP attack, right?
It does. And that's something worth thinking about. What would it take to not just survive something like that, but to actually rebuild from it, to learn from our mistakes and create a society that's truly ready for whatever the 21st century throws at us,
Makes you think, right? Could something as awful as an EMP, something that could destroy so much, could it actually be the thing that makes us change for the better?
It's a really interesting idea. Out of something so devastating, maybe we'd finally find a way to rebuild not just the physical stuff, but our whole way of life.
So instead of thinking of it as the end of the world, maybe it's more like a chance to start over.
Yeah, like a forced reset almost. Imagine a world where we actually have to prioritize resilience and sustainability over, just convenience and buying more stuff all the time.
We talked about making our infrastructure tougher. But what about our energy sources? Could something like this actually make us switch to renewable energy faster?
It's definitely possible. What if, after an EMP, we weren't so reliant on those big centralized power grids anymore? What if we started using more localized systems, powered by solar, wind, things like that?
So less vulnerable to these huge outages and a greener energy grid at the same time.
Exactly. And think about the social changes, too. In a world without constant communication, without everyone being glued to their phones all the time, maybe we'd remember how important it is to actually talk to each other, face to face. Maybe we'd start valuing our local communities and being more self-sufficient.
It'd be like this crazy, unplanned social experiment, with really high stakes, of course. But it does make you wonder if maybe in all this technological progress, we've kind of lost sight of some important things.
That's a good question. And while I certainly wouldn't want to see something like this happen, it is interesting to think about the potential good that could come out of it, like the chance to start fresh and build something better. It reminds us that even when things seem really, really bad, humans are incredibly adaptable. We can find ways to overcome almost anything.
That's a good point. It's a little bit of a brighter way to look at it, even if it's, a pretty dark subject.
It is, and maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. We need to be aware, we need to be prepared, and we need to be willing to question our assumptions. And, those are important things, not just for dealing with EMPs, but for pretty much everything we face in the 21st century, right?
You've definitely given us a lot to think about today. So to everyone listening, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, a little like you need to go give your phone a hug right now, just remember what we talked about. We can do this. The more we understand the challenges we're facing, the better we'll be at overcoming them and creating a better future.
Well said. And who knows, maybe that future is one where we've learned to find a balance, where we appreciate technology but don't let it completely take over our lives. A future where we remember the importance of community, resilience, and just like appreciating the world around us.
And on that note, we'll leave you with that thought. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into EMP attacks. It's been quite a journey.